Thank you, first of all, for the incredible show of support and vote of confidence for those who attended the first Hakawati that I did on the poem that defeated Napoleon. That was just a confidence-building measure. This one is going to be terrible. No, I'm kidding, of course. This story meanders a lot more. That one was about a very specific incident, and this one is going to take a lot of twists and turns. Just please have the confidence that it's going somewhere. I don't really know how it's going to go because there's a few problems here. One is that I've condensed a very, very long story into about 15 minutes. The other problem is I don't like to eat before I present because it doesn't make me feel very good. So I'm very hungry, but I've consumed enough caffeine to kill a gorilla. So I have like a lot of jittery energy right now. So inshallah that this goes well. Okay. The Jaffa orange is one of the most enduring symbols of the Palestine frozen in time. And for many Palestinians, and my family is from Jaffa, we have a lot of fond memories, and I mean in our collective memory. We have a lot of happy memories about the Jaffa orange as a time when things were better. Now, today I'm going to present you with something resembling a revision of the story of the Jaffa orange. And I do not desire to shatter your impression, whatever that impression may be, of what the Jaffa orange represents. I merely want to present you with more depth about the Palestine frozen in time. Now, before I say another thing, I realized that yesterday I didn't actually introduce the name of my podcast, and when I was walking out, a bunch of people asked me. So it's called Preoccupation, A Not So Brief History of Palestine. If you're interested in these kind of stories, I tell a lot of them on the podcast. The story that I'm going to tell today, and kind of the revision that I'm going to tell, shares the lead up to the boom in the citrus industry. And it is a political story and an economic story, but from the perspective of the fallah, from the perspective of the peasants. Now, just by a show of hands, do any of you in the audience come from what would be traditionally described as fallahi families? Okay. So you will know then that in the collective memory of the fallahin, there are some things that are remembered differently. If you speak to fallahin, and particularly to families who still strongly identify as fallahin, there really is more than one Palestine frozen in time. And in this story, or the rendition of this story, America makes two interesting cameo appearances. I told you I'm going to meander a little bit, so here is my first detour. I need to have a brief discussion of the fundamentals of political science. A state is an institution that possesses complete control over the use of violence. Of all of the definitions of a state that I have ever come across, this is the one that I like the best. At its most fundamental level, a state is an institution that possesses complete control over the use of violence. Now, why this is important is because in the world of urban and rural and Bedouin Palestinians, the primary negotiating tool of the fallahin was their use of violence. And what I mean by that is that the fallahin were more numerous and were more heavily armed than their wealthier and more literate urban counterparts. But at a negotiation table, they always had the possibility of informing the notables that should they desire to, they could light up their cities. So the fallahin had this tool of violence. And subsequently, the Ottomans, for the vast majority of their rule over Palestine leading up to the mid-19th century, did not possess a monopoly over the use of violence. Now, why is it that a state would need to possess complete control over the use of violence? And that is to collect taxes, of course. If the state comes to you to collect taxes, and you responded with small arms fire and a barrage of Qassam rockets, they would not be able to collect these taxes in this way. So naturally, the state wants as little resistance as possible to collect these taxes. That's my first detour. Now, the second detour that I'm going to take, I need a little bit of audience participation. Palestinians in the audience, hands up. Okay. How many of you are familiar with your lineage based on the standard naming conventions of Palestinian families? How many of you are familiar with your lineage beyond 5 generations? يعني أكثر من الاسم الربعي, like more than just your, grandfather, beyond that. 6 generations? 7 generations? How many of you, for the few of you with your hands up, how many of you know whether your family was a Qais or Yaman family? Wow. Amazing. I didn't expect a single person to have their hand up. That's remarkable. So we do have one hand up. I only saw one. Was there another one? Right. Okay, so there's two or three hands up. For the vast majority of Palestinians, this is actually something that we've forgotten from our collective memory. That nearly every single Palestinian family was divided along 2 massive tribal confederacies, Qais and Yaman. And one of the remarkable things about these tribal confederacies is they transcended sectarian lines. And what I mean by that is that you had Muslim and Christian and Druze, Qais and Yaman. So if the banner for war was raised by the Yaman, you could conceivably have Muslim and Christian tribes fighting alongside one another against other Muslim and Christian tribes. All of that is just context for what I'm about to introduce to you and what unfolded in the 1860s. Leading into the 1860s, between the 1850s and 1860s, there were a series of tribal wars that were divided along these Qais and Yaman lines. And the Ottomans used the pretext of this instability to come and extend their monopolization and their centralization over the peripheral regions in their empire, including Palestine. The Ottomans used the instability that was spreading across Palestine to spread their monopolization of violence, to disarm the Fallahin. Now, this was no simple task. The Fallahin were heavily armed, and they didn't just have weapons. If you traveled through the Palestinian countryside at that time, you would have seen fortresses that were 2,500 square meters big. That's 27,000 square feet approximately. Enormous citadels rivaling anything that the Medicis or the Borgias had created. They were capable of housing 1,000 fighters, animals, weapons, food in the case of a siege. So when I say that the Fallahin were heavily armed, they were prepared for war. But this is where America makes its first cameo appearance. Because when the Ottomans arrived in the Palestinian countryside, this time they came with a piece of American technology that was the single most, in my opinion, the single most decisive technological transformation in the history of indigenous pacification and counterinsurgency, and that is the repeating rifle. Only a few hundred Ottoman soldiers, armed with repeating rifles, were able to do what just decades prior would have taken thousands of soldiers. Prior to this, it used to take a really long time to load a gun. But with a repeating rifle, they could run roughshod over thousands of Fallahin. It was a complete game changer. And it was a game changer that mirrored what was happening on this continent. Because while the Ottomans were expanding their influence over their peripheries, the American empire was at war with the Comanche. And the same tools that were used to pacify Palestine were also used to pacify what in this country are called the Plain Indians. And so politically, the Fallahin took a devastating blow. It was a huge hit because they lost their primary negotiating tool in this disarmament campaign. And if the Fallahin had taken a big political hit, it almost pales in comparison to the economic hit that they were about to take. When we think of the cash crops of Palestine, the Jaffa orange comes to mind, olives, figs. But in the early 19th, and in fact leading into the 18th century, so from the 18th to the 19th century, the primary cash crop of Palestine was cotton. It was the cotton industry that brought such enormous wealth to Palestine, and it was the cotton industry that was the most highly sought after and the most fought over. So Palestinian cotton was being exported to Europe and bringing substantial wealth until the mid-19th century, when America makes another cameo appearance. This time, it was the destruction of the Palestinian cotton industry with the flooding in the global markets of American slave cotton. The Palestinian cotton industry could not compete with low-cost or no-cost forced labor. The sheer scale of what America was exporting decimated the Palestinian cotton industry. Now, I started off telling you that I was going to tell you about Jaffa's orange industry, and here we are. In the wreckage of the Palestinian cotton industry, it's not that one led to the other, but chronologically, it almost perfectly went step into the boom of the citrus industry in the second half, beginning in the second half of the 19th century. The Jaffa orange was designed, it was set up for export from the beginning. And it was a fruit that was perfect for export. Before the days of genetic modification, the Jaffa orange was the perfect export crop. It had a thicker peel than the average orange, which means that it could be shipped around the world and would not rot by the time it reached the other side of the Mediterranean. It had a strong scent, and it was delicious. So it was a highly desirable product. But it still doesn't answer the question of why specifically in Jaffa did this industry have to take root? Because the Jaffa orange could be grown in other parts of Palestine. So there are a few things that made Jaffa so special. One is that the soil was fertile. Like, it could grow there. Okay, so this is the first thing. The other thing is Jaffa already had an ancient port that could be used for export. It wasn't great. You still needed young boys to scurry across the waters with small boats because the ships couldn't make their way all the way to Jaffa's coast. So it wasn't perfect, but it was good enough for international export. The other thing is that Palestine's rainfall was erratic and unpredictable, but Jaffa had an abundance of underground fresh water. So with basic ox-powered irrigation, you could take that water and cultivate oranges. And so maybe some of you are thinking, if the fallahin are being displaced from Palestine's interior and are being squeezed out by this centralization, and if the fallahin can no longer produce cotton profitably, why not just switch to oranges? And here's why. To go from seedling to cotton-producing plant takes about 3 to 6 months. So from the moment that you plant a seed in order to grow cotton, takes something like 6 months. To go from seedling to fruit-bearing orange tree takes 8 years. So a fallah would have needed savings of up to 8 years in order to survive the transition from cotton to citrus. And that was just beyond what the average fallah could keep up with. And so, by the time the first box of oranges was ready for export, it was already beyond the reach of nearly every fallah in Palestine. So why did I share this story? Like, this is not a feel-good story, and I promise later in the evening, I do have a feel-good story for you, but this is not one of them. And here's why. Zionism has allowed for us the space of imagined fantasy nostalgia. As part of the erasure of Palestine, we have only been permitted to remember that which is fantastical. But reality is messy, and it is painful, and it is sometimes awkward. In the same way that our pores and our blemishes and our crooked eyebrows and our broken noses and our twisted teeth are what differentiate us from a storefront mannequin, it is our blemishes and our pain and our awkwardness that makes our story real. I came here, and I mentioned this yesterday, I came here with a promise to revive the Palestine frozen in time. Given the option between a feel-good story and a real one, I will always opt to tell the real one, because that's how we rediscover the Palestine frozen in time. Thank you.